The picture in our heads is old. It's familiar. A Neanderthal man, muscular and hairy, stands on a rocky outcrop. He holds a heavy wooden spear. He's looking out over a valley, searching for mammoth or giant deer. Back in the cave, a woman tends the fire. She's surrounded by children. She's mending hides or gathering roots. He is the hunter. She is the gatherer and the mother. This is the story we've been told for a long, long time. It's the man, the hunter model. And for decades, it was just accepted as fact. But what if that picture is wrong? What if it's not just wrong, but completely backward? New evidence and a fresh look at old bones are starting to tell a different story. A story where Neanderthal women were not just gathering berries, they were out there in the cold, facing the same dangers as the men. They were hunters. The question now is, how much did they hunt? Were they just helping out? Or could they have been the main hunters in their groups? This isn't about modern politics or wishful thinking. It's about following the evidence. The clues are buried in the earth, written in the chemistry of ancient bones and in the scars left on skeletons. And those clues are challenging everything we thought we knew about our closest extinct relatives. The story of Neanderthal life is getting a lot more complex and a lot more interesting. It seems the division of labor we take for granted might be a much more recent invention. For the Neanderthals, survival might have been an all-hands-on-deck affair. To understand why the old story was so powerful, we have to look at how it started. The idea of man the hunter didn't come from the fossil evidence itself. It came from the people who were looking at it. Early archaeologists and anthropologists in the 19th and 20th centuries were men living in societies with very strict gender roles. They saw a world where men went out to work and women stayed home. When they looked back into the deep past, they projected their own world onto it. It just seemed natural, obvious even. They had some modern examples to back them up. They looked at recent hunter-gatherer societies around the world. In many of them, there was a general pattern. Men often hunted large animals. Women often gathered plants, insects, and small game. They tended to stay closer to camp, especially when they had young children. So, the scientists connected the dots. If modern hunter-gatherers do it this way, then ancient ones probably did too. Neanderthals, they figured, were no different. This assumption created a powerful bias. When archaeologists found a Neanderthal skeleton buried with spear points and animal bones, they almost always labeled it male. If they found a skeleton with maybe a scraper tool or near a hearth, they might label it female. The evidence was being interpreted through the lens of a pre-existing story. They found what they expected to find. This is called confirmation bias, and it's a hard thing to shake in science. For a long time, very few people questioned it. The image of the male hunter and the female homemaker was just too neat, too simple. It fit. But Neanderthals were not modern humans. They lived in a completely different world. Ice Age Europe was not the Kalahari Desert or the Amazon rainforest. The environment was brutal. It was cold, and for much of the year, edible plants would have been scarce or completely unavailable. Gathering nuts and berries was not a reliable way to feed a family through a long, dark winter. The most calorie-dense, reliable food source on the landscape was other animals. Big animals, mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant elk, bison. These were walking packages of fat and protein. And Neanderthals were built to get them. This is where the old model starts to fall apart. The group's survival depended almost entirely on meat, especially in winter. Could they really afford to have half of the adult population sitting on the sidelines? Could the men alone really hunt enough to feed themselves, their partners, and all the children? The math just doesn't seem to work. The energy demands would have been enormous. And this is where we need to start looking at the bodies themselves. The skeletons of Neanderthals have a lot to say. When we think of Neanderthals, we think of strength, and that's accurate. Both male and female Neanderthals were powerfully built. They had thick bones, barrel chests, and massive muscle attachments. A Neanderthal woman was not a delicate creature. Studies of her bones suggest she was stronger than most modern human men, maybe even on par with male powerlifters today. She had a robust frame built for a physically demanding life. The difference in size and strength between Neanderthal men and women, what's called sexual dimorphism, was also much less pronounced than it is in modern humans. Men were a bit bigger and stronger, but not by a huge margin. The women were formidable. This physical reality is our first major clue. Why would evolution produce such powerful, muscular females if their primary role was just gathering plants and staying near the cave? Such a muscular body is expensive to run. It needs a lot of calories just to maintain. Building and fueling that kind of muscle only makes sense if it's being put to regular, strenuous use. Used like hunting, the most compelling evidence comes from injuries. Life was rough for Neanderthals, and their skeletons show it. They are riddled with healed fractures and trauma. For a long time, researchers compared the injury patterns of Neanderthals to modern rodeo riders. They had high rates of head, neck, and upper body injuries. This wasn't from falling off cliffs or fighting each other. This pattern of trauma is the signature of someone who is getting up close and personal with large, angry animals. Neanderthals didn't have projectile weapons like bows and arrows. Their primary weapons were heavy, stone-tipped spears. But these were not throwing spears, they were thrusting spears. To kill a bison or a horse, you had to get right next to it and jab. Some incredibly dangerous work, and animal fighting for its life would kick, gore, and trample. This is how Neanderthals were getting those rodeo rider injuries. Here's the critical part. When scientists like Sarah Lacey and others started to systematically analyze these injuries, they looked at skeletons that could be confidently identified as male or female. And they found something remarkable. The women had the same types of injuries as the men, and they had them at roughly the same rate. They had fractured skulls, broken arms, and crushed chests, just like the men. This is a bombshell for the man-the-hunter model. If women were staying in the safety of the camp, while men were out on dangerous hunts, their skeletons should look very different. The men should have all the hunting-related trauma, and the women should have injuries from other activities, or just fewer severe injuries overall. But that's not what the bones say. The bones say that women were putting themselves in the same dangerous situations as the men. They were in the thick of it, they were facing down the same giant beasts, they were hunters. Beyond the injuries, there's the question energy. Simply put, Neanderthals needed a ton of it. Their large bodies and brains, combined with a physically demanding lifestyle in a cold climate, meant they had a metabolism that was off the charts. Some researchers like Kara Okebach have done the calculations. A typical Neanderthal might have needed over 4,000 calories a day just to survive. An active one, out hunting in the cold, would have needed even more. A pregnant or nursing female would have had the highest caloric needs of all. Where were all those calories coming from? As we said, plants were not a reliable option year-round. The answer had to be meat and fat. To meet these incredible energy demands, a Neanderthal group needed to be a ruthlessly efficient hunting machine. Every single capable adult would have been a vital asset. Having half the adult population, the women, as non-hunting dependents would have been an incredible energetic drag on the group. It's hard to see how a group could survive that way. Evolution doesn't favor inefficiency. The logical conclusion is that women had to be contributing to the food supply in a major way. And in Ice Age Europe, the biggest food supply was large animals. This wasn't just about bringing in a rabbit or a bird. It was about contributing to the big kills that could feed the whole group for weeks. The energy budget of a Neanderthal group strongly implies that women were not just occasional hunters. They were essential hunters. We can also look inside their bones for more clues about their diet. A technique called stable isotope analysis allows scientists to read the chemical signatures left behind by the food an individual ate over their lifetime. It's based on a simple principle: you are what you eat. Different foods have different chemical fingerprints. By analyzing the levels of certain isotopes, like nitrogen and carbon in bone collagen, we can reconstruct a person's diet. Nitrogen isotopes, for example, tell us how high up the food chain someone was eating. A plant eater has low levels. A creature that eats plant eaters has higher levels. A top predator that eats other meat eaters has the highest levels of all. When scientists analyzed the bones of Neanderthals from all over Europe, they found consistently high nitrogen isotope levels. They were at the very top of the food chain. They were hypercarnivores, getting the vast majority of their protein from meat. This wasn't a surprise. It confirmed what the animal bones at their sites suggested. The truly revealing discovery came when they compared the isotope levels of male and female skeletons. If the man-the-hunter model was correct, we would expect to see a difference. The men eating prime cuts of meat from their kills should have different isotopic signatures than the women, who were supposedly eating more plants and maybe smaller animals. But again, that's not what the data shows. Study after study has found no significant difference in the diets of Neanderthal men and women. They were eating the same things. Both sexes were top-level carnivores. This doesn't directly prove who killed the animals. It's possible the men did all the hunting and just shared the food equally. But it makes the separate roles model much less likely. In a world of scarcity, it's hard to imagine a system where one group does all the dangerous work and the other group gets an equal share of the rewards, without contributing directly to acquiring it. The simplest explanation for the identical diets is that men and women had identical roles in getting that food. They hunted together, they ate together, they were a team. So, if women were hunting, how did it work? It's unlikely that Neanderthal hunting was a simple affair of one big, strong guy taking down a mammoth. That's a movie scene, not a plausible survival strategy. Hunting large, dangerous animals is a team sport. It requires strategy, communication, and different roles. Neanderthal hunting was likely an ambush-style, close-quarters affair. And they would use the landscape to their advantage, trapping animals in box canyons, driving them off cliffs, or cornering them in swamps. In this kind of group hunt, there's a job for everyone. Some people might be responsible for making noise and driving the animal toward a trap. Others might be positioned to block escape routes, and others would be the ones to move in with the spears for the final kill. These roles don't all require the same level of brute strength. They require knowledge, speed, and courage. A smaller, faster individual might be better at hurting an animal than a larger, stronger one. There is no reason a woman couldn't perform any of these roles. This idea has been called the all-in or overlapping roles model, proposed by archaeologists like Steve Kuhn and Mary Steiner. They argue that unlike early modern humans who developed specialized tools and a wider diet, Neanderthals had a very narrow focus. They hunted big game, and their society was organized around this single central task. There was no room for specialists. There wasn't a hunter and a gatherer and a toolmaker. Everyone was a hunter. Everyone was a toolmaker. Everyone did what was needed for the survival of the group. Men, women, and probably even older children all played a part. The entire group was the economic unit. But this brings up the biggest and most obvious objection. What about babies? What about pregnancy and childcare? This is a serious biological reality that can't be ignored. And a woman in her third trimester of pregnancy is not going to be chasing a giant deer. A woman nursing a newborn is not going to risk getting trampled by a woolly rhino. This is the main reason the man-the-hunter model seemed so logical for so long. Childbearing and childcare are real constraints. This is a valid point, but it doesn't necessarily mean women never hunted. It just means they probably didn't hunt all the time or in the same way throughout their entire lives. A Neanderthal woman's life wasn't a constant cycle of pregnancy and nursing. Neanderthals likely had very low population densities and slow reproductive rates. They probably had children spaced far apart, maybe every 4 or 5 years. So, a woman would have spent many years of her adult life not pregnant and not caring for a tiny infant. During those times, she would have been a fully capable member of the hunting party. And what about when she did have a small child? It's highly unlikely that a Neanderthal mother was a single parent. They lived in small, close-knit family groups. The concept of communal childcare or alloparenting was probably essential for their survival. The grandmothers, older siblings, aunts, or other members of the group who were not on the main hunt could have looked after the young children. This is common in many human societies and even in other primate species. The survival of the group depended on a successful hunt, so it was in everyone's best interest to free up as many capable hunters as possible. The hunting strategies might have also been flexible. Maybe when several women in the group had young infants, the group shifted its focus. Perhaps they hunted smaller, less dangerous game closer to camp, or maybe they used different techniques that were lower risk. Or perhaps the women took on roles in the hunt that kept them further from the most immediate danger, like driving the animals rather than making the final kill. The key is flexibility. Their survival strategy wasn't a rigid, unchanging set of rules. It was a dynamic response to their environment and their group's current circumstances. The childcare issue is a hurdle, but it's not an insurmountable barrier that would prevent women from ever being hunters. So, let's go back to the original question. Were women the main hunters in Neanderthal groups? The evidence we have does not suggest that women were hunting more than the men. The term main hunters might imply that men took a back seat, which is unlikely. The skeletal evidence shows that both sexes were getting battered and bruised in the hunt. The isotope evidence shows they were both eating a carnivore's diet. What the evidence does suggest, and suggests very strongly, is that the old model of a strict division of labor is wrong. It wasn't man the hunter and woman the gatherer, it was everyone the hunter. Men and women were partners in the most critical task of their lives. They were co-main hunters. The idea that one sex was the primary provider and the other was the dependent is almost certainly false. They depended on each other, and the group depended on all of them. The term main might be misleading because it implies a hierarchy. A better way to think about it might be that both men and women were essential hunters. The loss of any capable adult, male or female, would have been a devastating blow to the group's chances of survival. They couldn't afford to have non-contributors. Everyone had to pull their weight. This new picture of Neanderthal society is revolutionary. It forces us to shed old biases and see them for what they were. They were not brutish cavemen dragging their women by the hair. They were a highly successful and adaptable species that survived for hundreds of thousands of years in a harsh and unforgiving world. And they did it by working together. Their society was likely far more egalitarian than the ones that followed. Skill, knowledge, and courage were probably valued wherever they were found, regardless of sex. The story is not completely finished. We are still learning. New fossils are found, and new scientific techniques allow us to ask more detailed questions of the old ones. But the direction of the evidence is clear. The image of the Neanderthal woman waiting by the fire is fading. In its place is a much more powerful and realistic image. It's the image of a woman standing beside a man, both holding spears, both caked in mud and blood, both looking out over the frozen landscape. They are a team, they are survivors, they are both hunters.